family of three brothers shot and killed within a week of each other are hoping for some leads in their murders.
It was just such a senseless amber.
I've saw reports of people losing multiple children in their lives, but 3 in 1 week, man, it's insane.
In February 2021, three brothers, Brian, Bradley, and Brandon Veal, were brutally murdered in the span of just 1 week. Their killer, still out there, walking free, and leaving behind a trail of devastation. But what happened, and why are these three brothers dead? Brian, Bradley, and Brandon Veal were extremely gentle giants born into an exciting and bustling world of sports, music, and New Orleans culture. It was an incredible time and place for the brothers to grow up. Brandon, being the oldest of the three, looked out for and protected his two younger siblings. Brian, the middle child, was a lot more laid back and free-spirited. He was the kind of fun guy who you just enjoyed being around. Bradley, the youngest of the boys, was a mama's boy who more than anything else adored his family and had an incredibly close bond with their mother, Danielle. Brian, Brandon, and Bradley Veal loved to crack jokes with each other and rarely spent time apart. They were more than just brothers, they were best friends.
Okay, I got one. What do you call a deer with no eyes?
I don't know what you call a deer with no eyes.
I have no idea.
As they grew older, the trio would often hang out together, enjoying all that the city had to offer. New Orleans is known for its culture, food, and music, but beneath the charm lies another reality, a darker one. It would be all too easy for Brian, Bradley, and Brandon to fall into a life of crime if they wanted to. The city has seen its fair share of crime, but few stories are as chilling or mysterious as that of the Veal brothers. It all began on the night of February 13th, 2021, on the corner of Washington and Loyola, a neighborhood that was no stranger to the complexities of urban life. A tragedy unfolded, one that not only rocked the community, but tore the Veal family apart. As the brothers were walking home, they heard a car approach. They thought nothing of it until they heard the tinted window roll down. At that point, shots were fired from the vehicle, fatally killing the middle brother Brian and wounding the youngest brother Bradley. The car screeched off, leaving Brian to slowly die on the side of the road. The two other brothers immediately contacted the emergency services, though they were angry by how the police reacted. The police did not rush to arrive at the scene. When they did, they didn't seem concerned by the brutal and senseless murder, and slowly went about their duties as if it were more of an annoyance than anything else. Upset by the behavior and attitude of the police and traumatized by Brian's death, Brandon and Bradley started arguing with them and venting their frustrations about the lack of effort and care from the police. The two surviving brothers were eventually arrested on the scene for causing a fuss and disturbing the peace, though they were released later the same evening. Brian was just 26 years old. A beloved son and brother, he was described by his family and friends as someone full of life, who always tried to take care of his family. But on that night, Brian became the first victim in what would become a string of devastating murders that would shake the Veal family to its core. The authorities seemingly begrudgingly started their investigation into Brian's murder. They interviewed witnesses, collected evidence, and scoured the area for clues. But despite their eventual efforts, they couldn't find any suspects, and they were no closer to finding who the killer was. The streets of New Orleans, which had always been filled with life, now seemed haunted by the shadow of a killer lurking somewhere in the city. In truth, there was too much crime in the city of New Orleans for the police to dedicate too much time or effort to finding this one killer. As frustrating and annoying as it may seem, there was little the police could do, which was only made worse by their lack of care or compassion for Brian and his grieving family. But just 1 week after the tragic killing of Brian, things would get a whole lot worse in a shocking twist to this already deadly story. Just 1 week later, on February 20th, 2021, the unimaginable happened.
1 week later, half a mile away, 2 more men were gunned down in a spray of bullets that left holes in homes and neighbors on edge.
Bradley and Brandon Veal, Brian's younger and older brothers, were walking along Carondelet Street. It was quiet, and there was not much going on. The two of them felt lost and broken without their brother there, but they did their best to carry on. As they walked home from a fast food restaurant, another car screeched up next to them. Traumatized by what had happened only a week before, Bradley and Brandon tried to run and duck for cover, and they were right to do so as gunfire erupted from the car. Still, the two brothers weren't fast enough, and they were struck multiple times by the hailstorm of bullets that were blasted their way. Brandon died instantly, bleeding out in the street, just as Brian had only 7 short days before. Bradley clung to life until the emergency services arrived. However, he died hours later in hospital. Some suggested that while he had many wounds from the bullets, seeing his two brothers murdered in the space of a week made him give up on his will to live. Bradley couldn't bear to be in the world without his two brothers, and he gave up on life so he could once again be with his two best friends. But why had this happened? In a single week, a family was shattered and ripped to pieces. 3 brothers, taken from the world in the blink of an eye, with no clear motive, no confession, and no closure. The police knew that they had to act quickly in order to figure out what had happened and how to stop this killer from killing again. Detectives obtained nearby camera footage of Brian's murder, but couldn't identify any assailants due to them firing from a fleeing vehicle. But what was shocking was how many bullets were actually fired from the car during this ambush. They seemed to keep going and going. It was clear that whoever was pulling the trigger did not want Brian to live.
It was just such a senseless ambush.
Sadly, in the case of Brandon and Bradley's murder, there were no witnesses or footage. The police had nothing to start with in their investigation. The killings of Bradley and Brandon were eerily similar to Brian's. Another shooting, another cold-blooded attack. The authorities were left with more questions than answers as they struggled to comprehend what had happened and how to even start going about solving this horrific and devastating crime. The people of New Orleans were in shock. Could the 3 murders be connected? Was the Veal family being targeted? It didn't seem like it could be a mere coincidence that the 3 men were all killed in such a short time span, in pretty much the exact manner.
I've saw reports of people losing multiple children in their lives, but 3 in 1 week, man, it's insane.
The New Orleans Police Department worked around the clock, but the case was a labyrinth of dead ends. Aside from the phone footage, which admittedly didn't offer any real answers, they had nothing. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. No solid leads emerged. The family, friends, and the entire community were left in anguish, desperate for answers. The Veal family was devastated. 3 sons gone in the blink of an eye, and the one thing that could bring them peace, a sense of justice, remained out of reach. The grief was overwhelming. The brothers were described by loved ones as close-knit, protective of each other, and deeply connected. So, what could possibly explain these murders? Was it a random act of violence, or was something more sinister at play?
The family of 3 brothers shot and killed within a week of each other are hoping for some leads in their murders.
Theories have swirled in the community. Some believe the brothers were caught up in something they didn't deserve, possibly a case of mistaken identity. Gun crime was devastatingly common in New Orleans, so for the brother to have been accidentally shot instead of someone else was not out of the realms of possibility. But it felt like more than that. That surely wasn't the answer. Some speculated that the murders were a targeted attack, perhaps gang-related, or even tied to some personal vendetta. The 3 brothers were good lads at heart, but they were not exempt from getting into a spot of bother every now and again. They had had their own run-ins with the law, though it was never anything serious, and the 3 of them could never be considered bad boys or criminals. Still, that fact did nothing to stop people from speculating and wondering why they had ended up dead. But despite the theories, there has never been any conclusive evidence to point toward one particular motive. The police were left with little to go on. Witnesses either didn't see anything or were too afraid to speak. And the killer? Still free, likely blending in somewhere in New Orleans, unbothered by the horror left behind. Perhaps they had killed people before Brandon, Brian, and Bradley. Or, more terrifyingly, perhaps they had killed and would kill again.
To know that whoever the perpetrators are still walking around doing whatever, and we have no idea who they could be or who they are.
As the months passed, it seemed as if authorities would never find the killer of the 3 brothers. So in order to encourage people to come forward, they decided to put out a reward for anyone with information. If someone could provide the police with solid evidence that eventually led to the arrest, then they would receive the reward money in full. The police certainly hoped it would motivate people to try to remember what happened that night, and maybe do the right thing and tip police off as to who the true killer was.
The reward in the case stands at $10,000, but your time to collect is dwindling. It expires March 8th.
The problem was that even though people came forwards, there was no credible evidence that the police could act upon. There was nothing that definitively pointed to the real killer. Sadly, as time wore on, months turned into years, and there was still no breakthrough in the case. And to make matters worse, the reward money had an expiration date that was fast approaching.
The murders happened 2 years ago. This month, the reward expires next month.
This triple murder was very reminiscent of another crime that happened in Detroit, in which a woman, her husband, and the woman's 5-year-old child was gunned down.
I just can't imagine you pointing a weapon at a 5-year-old and killing my grandchild.
Inside a home, 3 bodies were found. They were those of 28-year-old Lashin Marshall, her 32-year-old boyfriend Aaron Benson, and most tragically of all, Lashin's 5-year-old son, Caleb Harris. It was a shocking homicide that left the city shaken. But who would do something like this? Who would murder the family unit? And not only was the case horrific in nature, but it also left neighbors worried about the killer, who was still at large. As with the murders of Brian, Bradley, and Brandon, investigators asked the public for their help in tracking down the killers. They had no information to go on, and the authorities struggled to piece together what had happened to the poor family. They put out a reward, hoping that it would jog people's memories and lead to someone informing them of the killer, and incredibly, the idea worked. The information they received led them to start looking at 2 teenage suspects, a 16-year-old and 17-year-old pair of boys. After researching and reviewing evidence, only the elder boy was arrested and detained, though he was eventually released due to a lack of incriminating evidence. Eventually, prosecutors started looking more closely into the younger boy and soon found that it was he who was the real killer. He was arrested, tried as an adult despite only being 16, and eventually convicted for 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of armed robbery, and 8 counts of using a felony firearm.
This case is truly disturbing, especially as it relates to young Caleb. For many reasons, it is disheartening to know that a juvenile is alleged to have committed these acts.
Thankfully, the murder of Lashin Marshall, Aaron Benson, and little 5-year-old son Caleb Harris were solved and justice was served. It just showed that seemingly unsolvable crimes could have a relatively happy ending, but it seemed that the mysteries around the tragic murders of Brian, Bradley, and Brandon would never be uncovered, and to this day, the crime still remains unsolved. New Orleans, with all its beauty and vibrant culture, remains a city where darkness sometimes prevails. The murders of the Veal brothers serve as a tragic reminder of the unsolved mysteries that still haunt these streets. Who would have the motive to kill 3 brothers, all within a single week? Why would someone choose to destroy an entire family? As time passes, the chances of solving the murders grow slimmer. But the community hasn't forgotten the Veal brothers. Each year, friends and family gather to remember the 3 young men whose lives were cut tragically short. They continue to demand justice, hoping that one day someone will come forward with the information needed to crack the case wide open. The tragedy of the Veal brothers is a story that will never be forgotten by those who loved them. Their memory lives on, even as their killer remains at large. As we reflect on their lives, one thing is clear: they were taken too soon, leaving behind a void that can never truly be filled. Knowing that the killers are still out there has made the family feel uneasy and not safe. Life for their family will never be the same, said Esther, but getting justice for Brian, Brandon, and Bradley would be the first step in the family receiving justice. Latricia, their aunt, continues to search for answers and is on an unrelenting campaign to bring justice to the parents and family. The streets of New Orleans hold many stories, some joyous, some tragic. The story of Brian, Bradley, and Brandon Veal is one of deep sorrow and unanswered questions. Until justice is served, their story remains a painful reminder that some mysteries may never be solved. So now it's over to you. What did you think of this heartbreaking, unsolved triple murder mystery? Why do you think the brothers were killed, and who do you think did it? We love to hear from you, so be sure to leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section down below. Please give this video a like and a subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.